Have you noticed the more you learn about Chinese, the more questions you have? Don't worry, they will lead you to more in-depth knowledge when they get answered. 大家好，我是 Crazie 老师，一边行走世界，一边教汉语。So when you first learn Chinese, you know 中文 means Chinese, and very soon 汉语 too is manageable. And then one day you were told 普通话 also means Chinese. It seems like Chinese has countless aliases, and you start to wonder what the difference is. I will share the 6 different ways to say Chinese and how each of them is used, so you will know exactly which one to use when situation arises. Let's start with 中文. Break the words down will really help you. 中 in here represent 中国, China the country. And when, well, when could mean a lot of things, but in this case, related to 文章, essay, so written part of the language. So technically, we're talking about the written part of China. Okay, so Chinese language. So similarly for English, it's coming from 英国, UK, and when the language of UK. And when do you use this word 中文? If you're learning Chinese, you will definitely use 中文. 我在学中文. I am learning Chinese. And when you talk about your Chinese classes, 中文课. 我们学校没有中文课. Our school does not have Chinese classes. Any other situation we use 中文? Yes, in China, 中文 is used as well. So for example, the Chinese department in the university is called 中文系. So if a Chinese person study Chinese as their major, they may say something like 我是中文系的. I am from the Chinese department. That means study business English for my undergrad. Okay, so 我不是中文系的. But I did study masters for teaching Chinese. Okay, we're all good. Now let's move on to number 2, 汉语. If you learned my radical lessons, you're going to recognize the 言, the speech radical in 语. So 语 is more spoken language. So we have, the spoken language of Han. What is Han? We need to go back to history. Okay, Han goes all the way back to the Han Shui, the Han River, or the Han water, literally. That is why you see in Han, we have the Shui, water radical. If you want to learn more about breaking down the characters, go ahead and check my radical lessons, okay? But back here, we have Hanyu. So basically, you're talking about the language of Han. And who is Han Ren? So whoever have the ethnic group of Hanzu. And where this Han ethnic group comes from, it comes from one of the most powerful dynasties in China, Han dynasty, Han Chao, and which is named after the Han River. As we know, a lot of civilizations, they built upon the water, right? So Hanyu is a more older name for Chinese. There are 56 ethnic groups, 56个民族, and 91.1% of them are from Hanzu. So 我是汉人. So how do you use this Hanyu then? Of course, if you're learning Chinese, okay, 他在学汉语. In this sense, it's interchangeable with 中文, but there are cases you will just use Hanyu instead. Okay, so for example, the exam HSK is 汉语水平考试, Chinese level exam. When I study masters, is teaching Chinese as a foreign language. So this major in Chinese is 对外汉语, Hanyu Chinese to outside, meaning I'm not teaching Chinese to Chinese, but teaching Chinese to outside countries, foreigners. Okay. And then the last situation is for 少数民族, minority groups. they have their own language. Some of them also speak Hanyu, the Chinese language. So in these relations, if they're talking about Chinese, they would use Hanyu as compared to their own language. For example, one of the biggest minority group is Zhuangzu. So then you'll say their language as 壮语 so we have 壮语 and then 汉语. Got it? Number 3 is 普通话. 普通 in Chinese is common, is average, right? What is 话? You know 话 from the word 说话 to talk. So 话 is like speech. 普通话 common speech. So why do we use 话? We don't use 语 or when the word for language. So as you see, 说话, right, to talk. So 话 in China is used when you describe all the original dialects. So for example, I am from this really tiny little town called Lujiang. So the dialect I speak is called Lujianghua. Now this also applies for big regional dialect as well, like Cantonese. Okay, Cantonese is literally called 广东话. So 话 again dialect, and Guangdong is the province where Cantonese is spoken. Now 普通话 actually have a really short history, well, compared to the history of China. It was invented after the Qing dynasty, right? There are so many dialects in China that sometimes it's impossible for one to communicate with another. So we need a common language. That's Mandarin Chinese. Okay, so it's also called 现代汉语, modern Chinese, which is 普通话. And who refers to Chinese as 普通话? It's mostly mainland Chinese. Okay, when they use 普通话 as compared to their own dialect. Okay, now what about the language that was used before 普通话? So that is 古代汉语, those ancient Chinese. Okay, so it's 文言文, classical Chinese. So how do we use 普通话 then? For example, when I went to my university in Chongqing, I often ask my classmates this one question. 你们可以说普通话吗? Can you guys speak Mandarin Chinese? Because you know what? What language do they speak? If they're from Chongqing, they speak 重庆话. So I don't understand them. So sometimes I really want to join the conversation. I may kind of ask, please, can you speak Mandarin Chinese? Another case is in China, there is actually a test for Mandarin Chinese because actually there's a lot of people speak Mandarin Chinese with a strong accent. Okay, so if you want to be an anchor, a host, TV show, right? You have to pass this exam. 普通话水平测试. So 普通话 level test as compared to the HSK 汉语水平考试 for foreigners who are learning Chinese. Interesting, right? If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So number 4, 国语. 国, you know 国 from 中国, 英国, so that's the country. And 语, that's the language again. So 国 in this case is like national. So 国旗 national flag. 国花 national flower. 国歌 national anthem. So 国语 national language. Whose national language? So 国语 it means Chinese, and it is usually used by people who are from Taiwan and who lives in Hong Kong. Why do they use 国语? 国语 as compared to what other language, right? So now we'll have to talk about another way to say Cantonese, which is 粤语. 粤语 that is also 广东话. Okay, just a different name. But for 广东话, since it's probably one of the most popular dialects, it's used in Guangdong province, Guangxi province, Hong Kong, Macau, and probably Taiwan as well. And in those regions, they will say 我们说粤语. We speak Cantonese. and Cantonese are probably their first language. And then when they go to school to learn Mandarin Chinese, call Mandarin Chinese 国语 instead. In Taiwan, I think they also have their own language, Taiwanese, so 台语. For example, a parent from Hong Kong may tell you, so actually I had 2 students from Hong Kong. When I refer to Mandarin Chinese, I will use 国语 with them. Okay, number 5, 华语. You probably don't hear it a lot. Is the language used by 华人 or 华裔. So 华人是 overseas Chinese. That means blood-wise, they're still Chinese. And 华裔is just the offspring of those Chinese, but maybe they grew up in a different country. So where does 华 come from? You know, China as 中国. 中国 is actually just an abbreviation for 中华人民共和国. So 共和国 republic, 人民共和国 People's Republic of China, right? So China actually in this case is called 中华. 中华. So you don't see 中华 a lot, but when they talk about the Chinese civilization, okay, they won't say 中国. Actually, they use 中华文明, Chinese civilization. Okay, so 中华, I guess you can think about this big Chinese culture, right? So 中华, so that's why you see for Chinese overseas, they call them 华人. 华语, widely speaking, they actually refers to, you know, all the language, all the dialects that 华人 speaks. But more recently, the meaning of 华语 has narrowed down to Mandarin Chinese, like 普通话, 国语, 汉语, 中文. And who use this term 华语? Overseas Chinese people who live in 印尼, 新加坡, 菲律宾, 泰国, 马来西亚等等. But don't worry too much about this 华语, because you can totally understand you if you use 中文, 汉语, 普通话, 国语. That's the beauty of the language too, even though there are many options. As long as you know one of them, you can still communicate. All right, so what's the last one? We have talked about any possible way to say Chinese, right? For Chinese mainlanders, for overseas Chinese, for Chinese in Hong Kong, for people who are learning Chinese. And the last one is Chinese as a Chinese subject. So it's called 语文. All right, for the last 5 words, you know, we always say that 语, the spoken language, and 文, the written language. Now, when you combine them together, here is the textbook, 语文, from my primary school. You have to learn, you know, of course, the language and culture, right? That's why you have to follow Crazie Laoshi to learn more about the language and culture. And so in this case, you will, when you talk about the subject of Chinese, 他语文和数学都很好. Her Chinese and math were both good. Okay, just like me when I was in primary school. So in this case, as you know, it's just the Chinese as a subject for Chinese students. Last but not least, I know you probably have similar questions in your mind as well. When you talk about other languages, right? Do you use 文 or do you use 语? For example, Japanese language. Do you say 日语 or do you say 日文? As a matter of fact, in mainland China, there's no difference. However, I do notice 日语 is used more than 日文. And maybe in Taiwan and Hong Kong, 日文 actually used more. Okay, so one thing I would say is just be consistent with your word choice. If you go with 语, you know, 日语, 英语, 法语, 德语. If you use 文, you know, 西班牙文. Hopefully now you're not only know the 6 different ways to say Chinese, but also understand them. And don't be surprised in the future that you know there's more than one way to say one thing. The regional differences will always play a role in your word choices. For example, in American English, if you're from the South, they may use Coke to refer to all the sodas. And if you're from the Midwest, you may use pop. If you're from other parts, you may use soda to refer to all the sodas. And if you have anything else to add or questions, leave a comment. And make sure to subscribe to Crazie Laoshi, learn both the language and the culture. 我们下个视频见。